All right. So, as some of you know me, some of you may not. I'm Beth Soderberg. I've been involved in the DC meetup for a long time, and I'm really, really excited to see all of you today as we are working on our meetup revival. Um, we've got Marissa Goldsmith here today, who has spoken at WordPress DC before at the meetup and at our once beloved WordCamp. So she is an expert in all things analytics and has been for many, many years. And while we were thinking about topics that we might use to attract people back to the meetup, Tom was like, GA4 is scaring everybody. We have to talk about it. And I said, oh, I know somebody. And that was Marissa. So a special thanks to her for taking the time to put this together. Also, because it's taken us a little bit to get our groove. So she's been very patient. I think I first asked her to do this in like maybe May. So I'm glad it's finally happening. And yeah, so feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go. We are recording this. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel when we are done, and we'll do some Q&A when Marissa's done with her presentation. So feel free to chat, and otherwise, Marissa, let us know if you need anything, but feel free to take it away.
Great. I assume start with a thumbs up that you can see my screen and you can hear me. Okay, perfect. So welcome to Google Analytics 4, everyone. If you've been using analytics for a while and you're in the free analytics tool, you've been here since July. And I know it's a lot different than Universal Analytics, but I promise it's still a very usable tool, and there's a lot of really great things that you can do with it. And this is about me. I am an independent analytics consultant. I have no problem calling myself a freelancer. Some people don't like that term, but that's what I consider myself. So I've been a freelancer since 2016. My first experience with doing any work on the web was in 1996, when the college department I worked for wanted me to make them a website. So they registered me for an HTML class, only they put me under the name of a professor because only professors could take the class. So someone believed that this 17-year-old girl walking into a course was the world-class expert on women in anthropology. That was me. And then I also live in Springfield, which is the childhood home of David Grohl. So if you are a Foo Fighters fan, you can think of me. So I've given a presentation in or around this about 20 to 30 times in the past few months. And does anybody here use Noun Project? Anyone at all ever use it? Noun Project is a place where you can, like, for $70 a year, get like access to all these icons. And so I love filling my presentations with icons, and you can search and they find these fabulous icons for you. So I was starting this presentation, giving it starting in like March, April, May of last year. And this is like, how did we get here? And it was like this cute little question mark with arrows and whatnot. And so as I kept giving this presentation, I began to feel a little bit more like this. It was less of how did we get here and a more of why is Google doing it to us? And it's not a terrible thing and it's not bad, but a lot of people feel like this has been foisted on them and very quickly. And so I wanted to give some context as to why this was happening. Well, most of us were very comfortable in Universal Analytics when you were in it, as much as I did. You really did begin to see that it had some pretty severe limitations. And for those of you that are familiar with GDPR, there was absolutely no way that Universal Analytics would ever be made GDPR compliant in Europe. There's still debate as to whether GA4 is compliant in Europe, but Universal Analytics just couldn't be compliant. Universal Analytics also, as much as they tried to fit an apps model, really couldn't fit an app model very well. And it was probably getting really costly. I had one client who had data going all the way back to 2006 when Google Analytics first launched. And storing that data forever and ever in these old systems was probably getting pretty expensive, and they were kind of doing it for free forever for everyone. And so when you think about Universal Analytics, it does three things, right? It collects the data, it stores the data, and it helps you visualize the data. And so in November of 2015, that's when the Universal Analytics first launched. And it was doing all these three things. Problem was, this was 2015. And over time, technology changed. And so while it was doing these three things okay in 2015, over time, it just got worse and worse at all of these things. The data collection, the hierarchy was very limited. The idea of user to session to page view to event didn't make sense for everyone's tracking. Data storage would get more and more expensive over time for Google. And so Google's solution was often to sample data that you would get. And so sometimes you would get poor data quality. And then I at least found the visualization tools that were within Universal Analytics pretty limiting. You couldn't merge in other data sets. You were limited by this hierarchy. You couldn't find creative ways to mix scopes, meaning like something that happened on the session level and something that happened on the page view level. So where does that leave GA4? GA4 excels in data collection. It does the other two things, but it does the other two things, but it gives you opportunities to outsource those other two things, data storage and data visualization, to other tools. Data storage, we'll talk about a little bit about BigQuery, and then data visualization, Looker Studio, which used to be called Data Studio, or connections to other BI tools. So I want to talk a little bit about some WordPress specific things, because this is the WordPress group. This is my favorite plugin for doing any Google Analytics or really Google Tag Manager work. Google Tag Manager is a tag management system run by Google, so it works really well in implementing Google Analytics. And so this is GTM for WP. If I'm working with anyone who has a WordPress site, this is what I would ask them to add to the site. It's great when you have, someone who can do the Google Tag Manager work, to give you a lot of flexibility. It has WooCommerce and contact form integrations. And then this is my number one choice. And in the absence of this, my number two choice would just be to manually add the tags and the snippets to the theme. There is another tool that I've worked with, which is called Monster Insights. I know that they have tiers where you have to pay for it. And this is good if you had limited analytics resources, like if you didn't need to specially track very special things. But the other thing it offers that a lot of people like, which other things don't, which is it brings your analytics reports into your WordPress environment. But it is not as flexible. For the most part, if I've been brought in to work with someone, they need more than what Monster Insights can give them. I'm going to talk now a little bit about the conceptual differences between Universal Analytics and Google Analytics 4. In the past, changes to Google Analytics have been what I would call tweaks or upgrades, but this is not a tweak or an upgrade. It is actually a different piece of software. This is not like going from Windows 10 to Windows 11. This is like going from Windows 10 to a Mac. The interface is very different from Universal Analytics. The base concepts are very different. And so hooray to you if you're on this call and you've never used Universal Analytics. This is actually going to be really easy for you because you don't have the years of the old tool. But if not, so here we go. There's a lot of really neat things that come with GA4. You get more built-in dimensions. I don't know how many people ever made custom events in Universal Analytics where you'd be like, okay, my event label is outbound link, and then my event action for outbound link will always be the link URL. But if it's a scroll, it will be the %. And then the label will be the text, unless it's a scroll, and then it's this other thing. And so you had this sort of mishmash where you only had 3 slots to work with and a few slots for custom dimensions. We get a lot of built-in dimensions in Google Analytics 4, like the link text and the link URL. They sort of just, as long as you configure it, they just come with the stuff. You don't have to customize anything. And then you have way more slots for custom dimensions. There's also several events you can now configure in the UI. So if you wanted to be tracking, if you wanted to track things like downloads and outbound links, there was some automation later on in the life cycle of Universal Analytics, but for the most part, if you wanted to track those things in Universal Analytics, you had to configure it to say like, every time a link that contains .pdf is clicked, go and fire an event at it. You don't really have to do that anymore. And there's a bunch. There's outbound links, there's file downloads, there's form starts and form submissions, there's scroll to 90%, the view search results. You can configure all of those within Google Analytics without doing any custom coding. Google also brings a promise of AI to fill in the gaps when there's missing data and to do more conversion and attribution modeling, data-driven conversion and attribution modeling. And the next one is something that a lot of people are a little nervous about, but I actually will say it's very, very easy, is that there is a raw data export to BigQuery. So with a little bit of knowledge and assistance, you can make extraordinarily advanced reports. And this has been I've done some really interesting and exciting things with museums where we can do really interesting tracking around QR codes throughout the museum per user that really wouldn't have been possible without having a raw data export like this. Mentioned before, in Universal Analytics, we have a hierarchy. We had a user, and then the users did things, and they were sessions, and then within the sessions, you had page views, and within the page views, you would have events that would fire. You may go into Google Analytics 4 and you may see a metric called sessions, and you may see a metric called new users, but these metrics, for the most part, are really just a count of other events that are firing. So new users, if you go, you'll see that you can see new users. You'll also see in the events report, there's an event called first visit. So for the most part, new users equals the count of first visit events. But what's nice about that is we can send a lot of different data with each field. Again, things like the page views. If you set up the GTM for WP, you can send things like the tags and the categories that the pages are tagged with, the author of the page, and you can send that with the page views with only some slight configuration updates. So I did mention that Universal Analytics had sampling. There's a lot less sampling that goes on in Google Analytics 4. I don't want to say there's none, because there is some in the Explorer reports, which we'll talk about later. But there is sometimes something called thresholding. And so what thresholding is Google Analytics takes a look at all your data and creates a threshold for the number of times something must happen to be included. And so if most of your page views get viewed 100 times a week, and then you have some page views that get viewed 2 times a week, they may not make the cut. And there's no number I can tell you that says, like, this is where thresholding starts. You'll just look at reports and there'll be a big exclamation point that says, like, thresholding may be applied to this report. If you have Google Signals turned on, that would have impacted your thresholding greatly. Thresholding was really bad when you turned on Google Signals, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there is now like a little toggle where you can say, like, yes, I want to turn on Google Signals, but please don't don't include it in my Google Analytics reports. Don't do the thresholding. Like, this is I don't even have a screenshot of it because this is a less than 2-week-old feature for you to look at. But I would say if you have Google Signals turned on, and there's a good reason for you to have Google Signals turned on, at least get the thresholding out of your data. If you have Google Signals turned on because it was a checkbox and you just checked it, turn it off. Google Signals is mostly useful if you're doing remarketing ads. So if you're doing remarketing, go ahead and leave it on. But the demographic data you get from it is hardly a benefit for the problem you're going to get with your reporting. This is a big one. This is data retention. So as far as we all knew in Universal Analytics, everything was retained forever and ever and ever. And then GDPR came along and Google required us to make a change to our data retention settings if we wanted it to last forever and ever and ever. This time around, if you look in the data retention settings for GA4, if you have the free version of Google Analytics, the maximum data retention setting you have is 14 months. So that's basically enough to give you slightly more than year-over-year data. Now, keep in mind, when we go through the reports, aggregated reports aren't affected by this. So like the default reports, like the pages report, will still go back, but if you make advanced reports and if you make advanced Explore reports, you may not be able to go back more than 14 months. If you have premium, if you use Google Analytics 360, which is still quite pricey, you get 50 months. So like if I had, like if anyone asks like, what should I do for my analytics right now? I would go in and check your data retention settings. Because by default, they actually set it to 2 months. You have a maximum of 14 months, but they set it to 2 months to start. Go in and change it to 14 months because that's not retroactive. And then the other thing I would mention is to set up the BigQuery connector. We talked about how we can have raw data in Google Analytics through BigQuery, and that is not retained for 14 months. That is yours to have forever and ever and ever. So that's the other thing that you should think about doing pretty soon, even if you don't have the resources to manage it. Excuse me. Even if you're not ready to do SQL queries just yet, turn it on now so that the data can collect, so that when you do, you actually have data to analyze. I'm going to talk about acquisition pieces now. In Universal Analytics, like how many people would just go to the source medium report? Like that was the main thing it did. I don't know if I get votes or anything, but think about that. And did you know, so the source medium report that you used to look at in Universal Analytics was still had an attribution model overlaid over it, and it was called the last click non-direct. By default, both Universal Analytics and Google Analytics 4 desperately want to attribute your traffic. It is the main thing they want to do. Their main thing they want to do is they want to sell ads, and the more they can make it look like people came from ads, the better it looks for them. And so what they would do is, if I came from Google to your site, my attribution would say I came from Google for that session. But then let's say 2 weeks later, I just remember the name of your site and I type it in. It's still going to say I came from Google, even though I just typed it in directly, because if they have a piece of information to not make it direct, they will not make it direct. And so it was always last click non-direct. In Google Analytics 4, you have 3 options for a source medium report. And if you go into BigQuery, you have even more. So there is a report that's user acquisition, which is first touch attributes, which means that in that session that I described, if I came back and I was looking at the first touch attributes, no matter what I did, my source would always be Google, because that was my first touch to the website. Then you want to go to session, or what's sometimes called traffic acquisition, which will be the same as what you saw in Universal Analytics, which is last non-direct source medium. And then the third one is what we would call conversion acquisition, in which Google lays a data-driven model over any conversions to distribute credit for those conversions. So if I came back 7 times, 7 different ways, Google is using its little black box magic to determine $3 of that should go to the organic search, $4 should go to ads. And that is acquisition modeling. Now, not a big deal that there are 3. What there is a big deal is the naming convention that Google uses. If you were making a report and you just typed in, I want to see the source medium, which is what you were used to seeing in Universal Analytics, it's going to give you that conversion model. And so if you actually don't have a whole lot of conversions set up, it's not going to make any sense. What you want to make sure you're looking at, if you want something akin to what you saw in Universal Analytics, is the session source and medium. Okay. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the menu that you see in Google Analytics 4. This is actually a great improvement over Universal Analytics. In Universal Analytics, you had the reports on the left-hand side, and those were what you had, and those were all that you could have. But we have a lot of flexibility in GA4. So when you go to GA4, you've got these 4 places here. Reports, Explore, and advertising. Advertising is what would happen if you had linked to Google Ads. So I'm not going to talk about that today. But your reports give you basic reports where you can see stuff every day. And Explore reports would be the custom reports that you can make simple or complex as you want. And we'll take a look at some of those. There is an option here for a real-time report, but I would, unlike Universal Analytics, which gave you the impression that you were looking at exactly what was happening on your site right now, it's really real-time-ish. It's what happened in the last half hour. And it's good for finding trends and looking to see if like the email you launched is getting people to the site right now. I would not use it for what I would call needle in haystack, like, do I see that Andrew Cohen has visited the site right now kind of things, because it's pre-processed and it may not be there. So we've got these things in the sidebar, and I want to tell you that this is customizable. So this is what it generally looks like by default. But if someone has gone and customized something already, it may not look like this. But we have these acquisition reports, which the user acquisition is the first touch, traffic acquisition is the session. We have engagement. And my best advice is that engagement, what you really want to look at are the pages and screen reports and maybe the landing pages report. I do not, if I need really specific event information, I would rather make an explore report, but it is there if you need it. And then we have the monetization reports, which are the e-commerce, basically the e-commerce section. They changed it from e-commerce to monetization because in addition to e-commerce purchases, you could be if you were putting a web app in here, you could be monetizing an app. And so we'll talk about some of these reports that are built in. Built-in reports can be customized, but sometimes with limits. And honestly, those limits are like something is lifted limit-wise like every 3 weeks with their new releases. Because every time I'm like, you can't do this, like a month later, it turns out you can. So I've stopped putting that in these presentations. And these built-in reports, they can go beyond data retention settings, and administrators can change the menus. I think I mentioned that before. But note that if you're an admin and you change the menu, everyone who logs in will see that change. Now, sometimes that's not a big deal. And sometimes I will do things like, I have a client and I say like, Crystal, these are your reports. And then she has a whole folder of her own reports. So these are the acquisition reports. Again, very much like the kind of reports we had before. But you'll notice like in Universal Analytics, you had like, here was the default channel groupings, and then here's the source medium and just the medium. But you can search and you can use secondary dimensions. So like if you don't like using the default channel group, you can change this report to just be the session source medium or any of these that you prefer. So for engagement, you have the events. Metrics in the overview is great for events, but like, again, I said that if you're going to be doing advanced events tracking, use the explore reports. But this is where the pages and screen reports is, which is the closest thing to the page view report right here. So this would be the page view report, and you can change from page and path and screen, or you can do title. I do want to talk quickly about average engagement time. One thing that people have noticed missing from GA4 has been session duration or time on page. It has been replaced by something called average engagement time. And what will happen is Google will not, and the thing is, session duration and time on page was never actually accurate in Universal Analytics to begin with. And that was a pet peeve of mine for a really long time. And so GA4 acknowledges that actually being very accurate in tracking time is difficult. And so they track the time that you are engaged on the page. And I think that this is, while the numbers look lower and might be upsetting to people when you re-report them, they really are a more accurate reflection of what is happening on the page, because Google will consider your site engaged if the user has your page in focus in the viewport for 10 seconds. Whereas before, all I had to do was open a tab and walk away. And it would still consider me, and then go back. And it would, if I had opened a tab, left for 4 minutes, and then came back and did something, it would have 4 minutes of my time on that page, when in fact, most of my time on that page was not near it at all. And then here's the monetization. I don't have any monetization on my own website, so I didn't have a good screenshot. So this actually comes, there is a Google Analytics for sort of demo property that you can get access to. And so this is what the e-commerce reports will look like. And again, we have item name. We now have we have 5 item categories that we can use. And a newer feature is there are item scope dimensions now as well. And the retention and user reports are pretty simple. Retention overview, how often people come back, the geography, and the tech. Again, if you've enabled signals, you might get gender, interest, and age, but I would really not recommend enabling signals unless you are doing remarketing. So the next part I'm going to do here are the explore reports. This is where you can have a lot of fun, where I have a lot of fun. And these can be very simple or very advanced reports. Explore is a blank slate report. You can mix and match many custom dimensions, segments. They can be shared with other users of analytics, but there are some limitations. The biggest limitation is that if I created an Explore report and I want to share it, number one, it shares with everyone in the property. But number two, like the person I've shared it with can't make adjustments. So let's say I have a monthly blog report and I share it with someone on my team. When that person logs in and says, okay, this is September, but I want to look back to August, they can't change the date range. They can make a copy of the report and change the date range, but they can't. So it's good to use Explore reports, but I would not consider them like a replacement for distributed dashboards. So we can make very simple table reports. I can do where my page is and how many sessions and page views it has. You can make multiple dimensions here. So I could have page location, source medium, I think up to 7 dimensions in the rows. Here you can also make a pivot table. You can see I've put the country over so we can see what the countries that they come from. And then you can put advanced segments. So if you had been used to doing advanced segments in Universal Analytics, this is the place where you want to do advanced segments. You can do timeline reports. So this is the same report I just showed, only over time. You can break it down by various dimensions. And one really neat thing that the timeline report has, I'm actually going to pull one up live and you let me know if you can see it. A minute. This is where I am. So this is what those Explore reports are, is that you can make a timeline report just like this. And these little hollow dots are anomaly detection. So you can put a range of what was expected and you can use anomaly detection and you can change the sensitivity and the training on the anomaly detection. So in these timeline reports, data may look all normal, but you can be like, oh, something happened on this day. And you can look into it. And I think that that's actually pretty neat. One other thing that I really like are pathing reports. These are sort of used to similar to the behavior reports in Universal Analytics, but I think you have a bit more flexibility. So I'm going to start it over. You have the ability to say, like, I want to see what after someone visited my homepage, how did they go? Or if I want to see when someone went to a blog page, where were they before that, right? And you can see things like that. You can also do it with events. Segment overlap is that if you can create a bunch of advanced segments and make a neat little Venn diagram of people who might be in those segments. So, people who came non-directly to my website versus people who have been in my blog. This is where they have both and they have overlap, and you can make multiple segments there. Other ones, which I will be honest, I have not used as much, but are still available. You can make cohort reports in Explore. You can make a very customizable funnel report. So before in Universal Analytics, the only way you could really make a funnel was through a purchase or a gold process where you distinctly said, like, step 1 was a page view, step 2 was this page view, step 3 was that page view. You can now make basically segments to say, like, step 1 of the funnel is came to the website via organic search. Step 2 is conducted a search in the search bar. Step 3 is you can make any sort of funnel that you want. And then next is the User Explorer report. This lets you follow an individual as they move through the site. With the User Explorer report, you can't say, I want to go and follow user ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But what you can do, I don't know if I have one up here quite live, is you can be like, this is the user explorer. I want to see all users who were on the blog page. And then you can see those users, and then you can opt to view. So these are all users who went to the blog page, and you can be like, okay, I want to see how this guy, I have reached my maximum number of tabs in here. And so this is like that user, and you can see how they went through things. And then there's another one called user lifetime, and I will admit I have not found a great use case for that. So I'm not going to show that one yet. So next I want to talk about filtering and segments, because there were a lot of folks in Universal Analytics who thought they were segmenting when they were filtering, and were filtering when they thought they were segmenting. So on all of your aggregated reports, you're always going to have the ability to filter here. You can also filter and save. So in this case, I'm going to see if I can pull up a demo. I've already done it before, but I'll do it again. If I go to the pages and screens, I can say, I want the blog. And then if you're an admin, you could hit this edit. You can see I don't have a lot of blog pages, but I have this edit button. I could do things to this now. So I can say, I want the page. This happened to me today where it wasn't working, but you can add a filter here that says, I want the page to be the blog. You can take away those top two charts. You can make the custom dimension be the page title instead of the page path. And then you can say change, and you can either save these changes to the current report, and then everyone will see it that way. You can create a new report. And then that will be in your blog, and that'll be in your library. So you have a library here, and you can save a bunch of reports pre-filtered. And then the other way, and I think you saw me demo that, was that in the Explore reports, you can create segments. Segments are nearly identical to advanced segments or in Universal Analytics. And this filter show a filter is different than a segment. A filter will filter in or out things that are appearing or could possibly appear on this chart. So if you had page views and country, and you filtered by country, it would filter things in or out. A segment shows any activity where something might have been at the site. So a filter would show only, if you had a page location report and you put in blog, it would only show blog pages, right? If you made a segment that contains blog, what it would do is it would show all the sessions and all the activities in all the sessions where someone went to the blog. And so that's actually really important when you think about conversions, because a lot of times I get a request is like, I want to know how many of my blog visitors converted, but the conversion itself is not on the blog page. That's difficult to do with filters because the conversion isn't happening on the page that you're filtering, but it's much easier to do with segments. So they're only available really in Explore reports, but they are retroactive. Another thing that I like, and it was a feature in Universal Analytics, but it wasn't advertised quite in a useful way. Audiences are like segments, but they are not retroactive. But you can build them and users become members of the audience. Traditionally, you use audiences for ads and remarketing, but they can be useful in report because then the audience name becomes a dimension. And so you can make an audience for purchasers, lead gen, and then you can have a nice little blog visitors, and then you can have a nice little table that has each audience name there. So again, on the list of things you should do right now, think about like what those top 3 things you like done on your website, whether it's a blog visit or a lead gen, and make an audience for them. Again, if you don't have to use it right now, but they're not retroactive. So if you start it now, the data starts collecting now. And now I just want to talk about a few things that are outside of the interface. Looker Studio, I suspect that if you ask Google what its preference is for you to do data visualization, it would not be to do it in GA4, but to do it in Looker Studio. For those of you who don't know, it used to be called Data Studio. It is free, and it can give you a lot more flexibility with how you present and distribute your reports. It could also make it so that so remember I talked about in the Explorer reports that the end user can't change the date range or change the filter you put in. You can make a Looker Studio report and they can do that very easily. And there is a GA4 connector to Looker Studio, which is really nice. There was a little bit of issue around this time last year because it uses the Google Analytics 4 API, and like all good APIs, there are limits, and they never really enforced those limits for Looker Studio because it was Google product to Google product. But then in November of 2022, they did, and suddenly all of my dashboards started breaking because if you refresh the dashboard 4 times, you would have reached those limits for that hour. A few months later, the limits remain the same, but the amount of tokens you used went way down. So running a report might have cost 1,000 tokens, now costs 50. All that is to say, like if you ever see an error like this in Looker Studio, it's often just come back in 10 minutes and it'll be fine, which is fine for me. It's not fine if I'm doing a Looker Studio report for like a nonprofit board. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about BigQuery. Obviously, the biggest drawback of GA4 is the data retention, but Google does offer an opportunity to transfer, I call it raw-ish data. It is technically processed, so to call it raw data is not completely accurate, but from a Google Analytics perspective, it's as raw a data as you're going to get. And it's not technically free and requires a credit card to get started, but there is a free tier, and it may take some organizations years to go over that free tier. I think I have one really large organization who might be at like $17 a month. And I think I mentioned that like Google Analytics Premium, the GA360, is a 6-figure product, costs 6 figures. And so like for years, we were always like between this, you either get a free product or you have to spend $100,000 on something that has so feature rich that you only need some of the pieces of. And I do love that the BigQuery piece is like this in between, where if you want to store your data forever and ever, maybe spending $10 to $20 a month is something that you're able to do. It is, however, a data warehouse, so it does require some knowledge of SQL to make sense of it all. And honestly, my biggest blocker with my clients is IT. Maybe you're a AWS house shop and they just don't want to set up something that's in Google. And so this is the end of the presentation. I do have in here some resources, some people that are worth following to learn more about GA4. So go forth and analyze, and I'll take any questions.
Okay, I'm going to open up the audio and the video. All right, does anyone have a question? There was one a little further back from Jonathan Taylor. He said, I'd be interested to know how to use QR codes to track in GA4 without sending users to a web page. Is that possible? This is for a QR code linking to a PDF in the WP uploads directory.
That would not be possible. Unfortunately, well, I'm not going to say it's not possible. You could use something, you can use the API or the measurement protocol, which would be like sending a hit to Google Analytics without actually hitting the web page. But in general, like UTMs don't work on PDFs because PDFs are not, because it's basically processing JavaScript, right? So you would have to manage something with the measurement protocol to add data in there, which is something I'd love to talk about, but it's not, it's a bit of an advanced topic.
Marissa, really quick, can you go back one last slide with the links?
Sure.
And then will a copy of this be available?
Yep.
Okay, we'll link to that both on the website and in the YouTube. So Jonathan Cornthwaite is asking, what's a common misunderstanding you're repeatedly running into with clients about GA4?
So the misconfig, like I said, I think I probably mentioned it 17 times, is that they, like, by default, the Google Signals was turned on. And that would cause a lot of confusion because, especially for smaller websites, things that they were sure should be showing up just were not showing up. Like, why did, my HubSpot said I had 3 conversions this week. Why are they not showing up in my Google Analytics? And then they would have the thresholding on, and that 3 conversions just didn't make the cut of the threshold. Number 2, the data retention settings. When for the confusion, it's I don't want to say like I don't understand it. I do understand it because it's a different tool, but everyone was like, well, what about my secondary dimensions? And why is it, if you go in here, it's going to, when you see this thing by default, it's always going to be page title. This is how it shows up by default. And everyone's just really confused that they don't, it's not obvious to them that like, you can just go and change this to page path. And it's sort of the same interface as Universal Analytics. It did actually have this, but it was a little bit different. And that you can do secondary dimensions still, but they just are like these little small things that people don't see.
Can you show us a secondary dimension really quick?
Sure. So I'm going to do the session source medium.
Oh my goodness. This helps clarify so much for me.
I didn't show the library because again, it's a big, but you can also do like a library report. So if you create, and so these are supposed to be custom reports that are just for you. I always do them blank, but you can use a, and so you can just like add the dimensions that you want here. I can't find what I want, but so that's, by the way, the source medium, that's usually not the one you want unless you're doing conversions. See, and remember I told you like sometimes there's just ones here that it doesn't let you do, and I don't know why I can't do session source, but we'll do session manual term. So you can make your own here. Actually, I prefer to do, this is one of the things I might do for events. So here's like link URL. I don't think I track a whole lot of link text on this one, but here's like link URL. We'll do the event count. And oh, great. I don't have any link URLs that get tracked, but you would have, if you were doing a lot of outbound links, you could have link URLs here. And then a secondary dimension of source and medium in the library as well. But again, this was not the best one to use because I don't have a whole lot of traffic in my own website.
I wish I had given access ahead of time to one of my high traffic sites.
Happy to do it.
Been a
Yeah.
cool experiment.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Laura who asked, when I was connecting GA4 to my website, I got confused and went the easiest route and added Monster Insight. Is Monster Insight okay for a small website agency, or is it too much? Thoughts?
I think it's okay. So like what I said, so I'm going to be honest, I haven't used Monster Insight with GA4. So I don't know specifically what it does for GA4. I did work with clients that used it for Universal Analytics. And I think it works really well. Like it worked really well for exactly what you're describing. Like I said, when they had called me in, it's because they wanted some very, very specific tracking done. Like they wanted to know like who clicked on this card and like, what about like clicks on various places. And at least in Universal Analytics, that was really not easy to do without doing a lot of customization. So I think Monster Insights is fine for small groups, for small orgs and agencies. It's when you're talking about doing really more complicated things like, I do a lot of navigation tracking, right? I'll track like headers and sidebars and lower bars and, mobile ones. And that's the kind of thing that Monster Insights won't do very easily for you. Although who knows, like I said, I since the GA4 upgrade, maybe they will.
Thank you for that. And so Becky Pendergast is asking, sometimes in the pages and screens or landing pages, I get a value not set. How do you identify what that is?
I can tell you what that is probably. Am I still sharing? Because I don't know if I have not
Yes,
set
you are.
Okay. All right. Let me see if I can find it. Let me see if I have any not sets, but I can tell you what that is about 90% of the time. I want you to look at my not sets. I don't have a lot of them, but what do you notice that's different about the not set than every other field here? Every other line.
No associated conversion.
Well, no, I have no conversions whatsoever. No new users.
No new users.
No new users. So what happens when your landing page or your page is not set is I do this. I go to my website. A page view fires. I look around, and then I walk away for 45 minutes and my session times out. Okay. And then I come back and then I scroll all the way to the bottom, and then a scroll event fires or some other event fire. You know, it doesn't have to be scroll. Traditionally, like you'll see a lot of scroll events on these kinds of pages. But what didn't happen before that scroll event fired? There was no page view fired. So basically they are timed out set. If you see that they are not new users, what they are timed out sessions that got restarted.
Fantastic. We have some questions.
I will almost always filter them out.
Okay. We have some questions around GA4. Or not GA4, sorry, Google Sitekit. Okay. Which I enable Google Sitekit on all of my sites. It seems to have smoothed out the process of getting the sites connected. What are your feelings?
I've never actually used it, so I didn't want to I did see it on there, and I did see it that it's like the first search. I think it's probably fine. I just haven't used it before, and so I didn't want to pass judgment on something I hadn't used.
So in my
and if folks want to talk about it, yeah, just go ahead.
In my experience, it helped me with the transition between Universal and GA4 because it helped set up properties. I don't know now that Universal is gone if it's still helping. As far as I can tell, the data is the same. But we have a comment from Catherine who says, I don't think it's great for reporting, but it's great for setup. And I think that probably speaks to what it shows on the back end. I personally have a question that kind of wedges in here. There is a plugin called Comito Analytics that tracks a variety of events. It's a laundry list, in fact. One of them is like scroll depth. But suffice it to say is I personally have had trouble making sense of what that really tells me about what's happening on the sites. Do you know anything about Comito?
I don't know anything about Comito, but I could talk for like an hour about scroll depth if you really want me to. But I can keep
February.
it to so number one, in here, so if you want scroll depth, you can actually get a default 90% scroll depth. Let me see if I can show it how. So this is how you would do like the customize. So like these are like those what they call enhanced measurement, some of the stuff that comes first. It's only going to give you, if you do this, it's only going to give you 90%. But I actually never have really loved, well, I loved scroll depth as a event, scroll depth as an event. When it first was available, because like all we used to have were page views and now we have a little bit more, right? But like everybody sets up their scroll depth the same way, which is like 25, 50, 75, doesn't take into account the length of the page, right? So if you're trying to be comparing content, it's hard. And so I actually wrote, look at here, I think somewhere here, there's an event that I like to use that I've configured. I call it a dwell and scroll, where you have to, an event will not fire if you scroll, and an event will not fire if you're on the page for a long time, but it will fire if you do both of them, right? Because, you know, so I have this thing up here like this, and I'm a nervous scroller. And when I'm sitting on meetings, I go like this all day. I don't know if anyone else does that. I've discovered I'm kind of unusual. I thought everyone did it. And so like, I've just totally ruined your scroll depth, right? Because I've just fired 17 events for scrolling. And then I might leave. And so what I've done is I've done this, I do for a lot of my clients, I do a dwell and scroll, which is, like I said, you stay on the page for a long time, a certain period of time, and you scroll, and then that fires. And then different from scroll depth, you can also, if you use Google Tag Manager, you can fire events on element visibility. So let's say you have a home page and you're just like, I don't know how many people experience this. You know, you have multiple stakeholders on the home page and everyone wants their thing on the top, and you really don't have the evidence to show that. Don't worry, people scroll to the thing that you like. You know, it's okay that it's there. I could do an element visibility event that says like, I see the blog list. I can do an element visibility event that says, I've seen this whole piece. And I find that those are a lot more effective than just scroll depth, which doesn't tell you what people saw.
That is fantastic insight. Thank you. That we have a question from Anna T that says, sorry if this is too off topic for WordPress, but my only recent GA4 experience is looking at analytics for an app built with Cordova. The vast majority of data coming in is not set. In the context of an app, would that also be a timeout issue? Second part to the question is, like someone closes out of the app and comes back in later to continue their session. Not sure if it becomes something different in this context.
I think it is probably, if it's most of your traffic, I would think that it is probably something different in this context. Might want to consider, if you haven't already, switch, especially like in the page view reports, or the page, because it's an app, the pages and screens report. Switching to see if you've like screen name is better than screen class, because what it probably means in the app is that the information isn't being sent. Apps work very differently than websites when it comes to tracking, only that when you build the, like, when you put your Google Analytics 4 on a website, like, it's done 17 things for my analytics by the time I've loaded this page. It's really different for an app where you do have to sort of send messages to Google Analytics.
And so I think that backs up to a question that I have, which is in the context of WordPress, is there a place where we can go to learn how to configure events and conversions for common things that we're doing, like whether it's events for event calendar or form submissions for like Gravity Forms, Ninja Forms, etc. No, is there some resource out there that
so I don't know that there's one that will catch all your WordPress plugins. Like I said, the one plugin that I do use, I think it tries its best to integrate with a whole, like I said, I know it does WooCommerce and I know it does contact forms. It might even do Ninja Forms. And I think Ninja Forms may have its own GTM integration. For those of you who don't know, GTM is Google Tag Manager. And what that allows you to do is it basically allows you to, I don't want to say you don't need any technical experience, but you don't have to write like long lists of JavaScript to do very customized things. Let me see if I'll pull up mine if it's. And so that's why I like the GTM for WP plugin, because it does a lot of very default WordPress things. So like, this is what GTM looks like. And don't worry, like there's lots of things in here because I play all the time. But like, I made a mail to, instead of, this is how I track my mail to clicks, is I can create a trigger that says like, if the click URL is mail to, it's a mail to click. And so that's what I use a lot for almost all of my implementations is Google Tag Manager, because it can customize so much. And because the most popular tools will have integrations probably with Google Tag Manager. And the reason why that is because when you're dealing with Google Tag Manager, it won't matter if it's Universal Analytics or GA4 or something you're sending to, the Facebook API, the Facebook API. It would all be in here, available to any data collection tool really that you wanted to do. So you can do conversion pixels in here as well.
Okay. Do we have any more questions for Marissa? All right. Beth is going to take us out.
All right. So thank you all for coming. I think keep paying attention to our meetup thread. We're also getting our website from think the last update before we took it over recently was from 2011.
Correct.
That back in order. We're getting our YouTube channel back up, and we've got some ideas for sort of asynchronous virtual events. Hopefully in the new year, we'll start feeling more comfortable about in-person events again. And that's all. So please reach out with any ideas you've got, speakers you know, etc. We're still looking for folks. Got a few people sort of lined up for the next few months, but we are working our way back. So it's exciting to see all of you. Thank you so much for coming. And Marissa, thank you again for all of your insights, which I always have to go and rewatch later because my brain can't handle it the first time. So, all right.
And we will make sure that all the links, including the slide presentation, are up on both the website and the YouTube channel.
Yep. All right, cool. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Have a great night.